We talk about these artists like they won. And from the outside, they did. The arenas, the screaming crowds, the platinum records hanging on the wall like proof of something real. But here's what the success hit. The stomach that never stopped hurting, the voice in your head that never went quiet, the secret you carried for 30 years because the world wasn't allowed to know, the brain injury nobody talked about, the therapist who was slowly stealing everything from the inside. Goodbye. 13 rock stars, real ones, people you've listened to 1,000 times, and every single one of them paid a price the headlines never fully told you about. You think you know these stories. By the end of this, you'll realize you only knew the surface. Number 13, Dave Mustaine.
I'm a social disease. Come for you.
Number 13, and honestly, this one sets the whole thing up. Dave Mustaine had the greatest second act in hard rock history. Megadeth sold 38 million records, 6 albums debuting in the Billboard Top 10, a catalog spanning 4 decades that no one could dismiss. But every riff he ever wrote, every note, he wrote with the ghost of a handwritten note following him around.
Let me introduce my...
January 1983, Dave is in a Los Angeles parking lot. His equipment is at the curb, his guitar, his amp, everything he owns, and he's holding a note from his own bandmates telling him he's been kicked out of Metallica. Not a phone call, a note, and a bus ticket home.
Leave you on your knees. No time for...
He was a co-founder. He wrote the riffs. He helped build the whole thing from nothing in a garage. And Lars and James decided he was too volatile, too hard to manage. So they brought in a younger, quieter kid named Kirk Hammett, who, and here's the part that still gets me, Kirk had been taking guitar lessons from Dave when he got the call. His own student replaced him.
For mercy, I choose to walk alone.
So Dave goes home, and instead of letting it destroy him, he channels the rejection into something. Founds Megadeth, writes albums soaked in the specific kind of rage only someone who's been publicly thrown out can access. Peace Cells, Rust in Peace, Countdown to Extinction. But here's the cruel twist. In 1992, the Grammys nominated both Metallica and Megadeth in the same category, Best Metal Performance. One for Enter Sandman, one for Hangar 18. The band that had kicked him out took home the award. Again, Dave Mustaine didn't win his first Grammy until 2017. By then, Metallica had won 9. Being the founding member who got replaced by his own student, and then watching the band use your guitar style to build one of the biggest careers in rock history, that's a specific kind of wound. And whether Dave ever fully made peace with it, I'll let you decide.
By those out there, vanishing thin air.
Number 12, Pete Townshend. You know that guitar, the windmill, the power chord, the controlled chaos of a band that was, at their peak, the loudest thing on the planet. Pete Townshend wasn't just the guitarist for The Who, he was the architect, the writer, the one who figured out how to make rock feel like something you didn't just hear, you felt it in your chest. If you've ever stood near a speaker stack and felt your heartbeat change, Pete Townshend is part of why that works. But here's what all that volume cost him. Pete Townshend is clinically deaf in his right ear, not rock and roll romantically deaf, not metaphorically deaf, medically, permanently, irreversibly deaf in one ear, and in the other, he has severe tinnitus, a constant high-pitched ringing that doesn't stop, day or night. Every room he walks into, for decades. He kept playing anyway. Because that was the price of being Pete Townshend. You couldn't just stop. The band needed you. The music needed you. So you pushed in the earplugs and walked back out to the microphone and stood in front of those stacks again. And here's the thing that doesn't get said enough. The tool Pete Townshend used to create some of the greatest rock music ever written, electric amplification turned up to the absolute limit, is the exact thing that destroyed his ability to fully experience it. He built his art with the instrument that quietly took the art from him. The addiction didn't help. Heroin in the late 1970s, alcohol that lasted longer. His memoir, Who I Am, doesn't look away from any of it. He survived both. He kept writing. But every time he walks onto a stage, and he still does, he walks out there with permanent damage that was done in service of the music. That's a price you can't get back.
Let's look at the numbers. Only 9% of you are actually subscribed. Honestly, that's tough to see. Our team spends days hunting down archives and verifying every single fact just to tell these stories right. If you've made it this far into the video, you're clearly part of the community, so please hit subscribe. It costs nothing and helps us immensely. Now, for those already subscribed, very few of you have made the jump to our membership, and that's a hard pill to swallow because you're the ones who know our value best. If this channel has moved you or inspired you, consider joining. It's the price of one coffee, but it's the literal fuel for this channel. Let's keep this alive together. Back to the story.
Number 11, Layne Staley. There's a reason Alice in Chains named their album Dirt, not because dirt is poetic, because that's where Layne Staley felt like he was living. In the early 90s, Alice in Chains were at the dead center of Seattle. Their 1992 album Dirt is still considered one of the defining records of that decade. Their MTV Unplugged in 1996 is still one of the best live recordings of that era. Layne Staley had one of the most singular voices in rock history. That descending, eerie harmony with Jerry Cantrell that nobody has ever been able to replicate. 5 of the 13 songs on Dirt were about heroin, and Layne wasn't hiding it. But here's what people missed. He wasn't writing those songs as a warning to the audience. He was writing them as confession, because by the time Dirt came out, the addiction had already taken hold in a way he couldn't get ahead of. His girlfriend, Demry Parrott, died of a drug-related illness in October 1996. People who knew Layne said he was never fully present after that. He retreated into his Seattle condo, stopped answering calls, stopped showing up, and if you were listening to music in the 90s, if Seattle was your world, if these were the songs that got you through something, you know that watching Layne disappear felt like watching the lights go out one at a time. I have been guilty of kicking myself in the teeth. The world didn't hear from him for years. They assumed he was somewhere struggling. What nobody knew was how far gone he actually was. He was found on April 19th, 2002. He'd been dead for 2 weeks. No one had noticed. The man who made Dirt, who could harmonize with a microphone like he was pulling something out of the air. He weighed 86 pounds when they found him. He died on April 5th, 2002. The same date Kurt Cobain had died 8 years before. That's not a coincidence that lands softly. Number 10, Jim Morrison.
When you're alone, women seem wicked.
Jim Morrison wasn't just a rock star. He was a myth that was still being actively constructed while he was alive. and that myth was doing a very specific job. The Doors formed in Los Angeles in 1965. By 1967, they had Light My Fire sitting at number 1.
No one remembers your name when you're strange.
Morrison as a frontman was something the rock world hadn't prepared for. Equal parts prophet, provocateur, and disaster in slow motion. You already know the image: the leather pants, the poet, the shaman, the man who could hold 60,000 people in his palm and seemed to not care at all whether he kept them. What the myth was hiding, and Morrison worked hard to maintain the myth, was that the shaman was a severe alcoholic who was drinking himself to death in front of everyone who was paying attention.
When you're strange, no one remembers your name.
And here's what makes this one hurt. By the end, his bandmates knew. Ray Manzarek once said that by the final year, Jim could barely make it through a set. That the performances people remember as iconic were, as often as not, Jim too drunk to be afraid of the stage. But the persona was so effective, the Lizard King, the poet, the dark genius, that the alcoholism read as mystique. That was part of the brand.
People are strange when you're a stranger.
And so nobody called it what it was. Morrison genuinely wanted to escape the persona he'd built. He moved to Paris partly to disappear from the mythology. He wanted to write, to think, to be taken seriously as a poet rather than a rock spectacle. He said as much in interviews.
Faces look ugly when you're alone.
He died in that Paris bathtub on July 3rd, 1971, 27 years old. No autopsy was ever officially performed. The doors he couldn't close were the ones inside himself.
When you're a stranger, faces look ugly.
Number 9, Scott Weiland. Stone Temple Pilots' Core came out in 1992. Purple came out in 1994. 6 million copies sold. Velvet Revolver, 2 Grammys, one of the most distinctive voices in 90s rock. And underneath all of it, a secret Scott Weiland carried in his autobiography for anyone willing to read it. At age 12, Scott Weiland was sexually assaulted by an older male. He wrote about it in Not Dead and Not for Sale. He described repressing the memory for years, pushing it somewhere it couldn't hurt him, until the weight of it started coming out in ways he couldn't manage. And the first thing that managed it, that genuinely quieted it, was heroin. In 1993, on a tour stop in New York, after his band had gone platinum after the Grammy nomination, after all of it, he wrote about the first time it made all the insecurities just go away. He said he suddenly understood how normal people felt every day. That's not a person who chose drugs for fun. That's a person who finally found the first thing in his life that made the noise stop. The next 22 years were the story of that first hit. Rehabs, arrests, being fired from Stone Temple Pilots, building Velvet Revolver, being fired from Velvet Revolver. His bandmates literally walking past his hotel room door to check if he was still breathing. Robert DeLeo has said that out loud. He died on December 3rd, 2015, found on a tour bus in Bloomington, Minnesota, 48 years old. After he died, his ex-wife wrote an open letter. She said, "Our hope for Scott has died, but there is still hope for others." Let's choose to make this the first time we don't glorify this tragedy with talk of rock and roll and the demons that, by the way, don't have to come with it. That's not just a goodbye. That's a reckoning. Number 8, Syd Barrett. There's the band that Pink Floyd became, and there's the band Pink Floyd was supposed to be. In 1967, Syd Barrett was the most inventive frontman in English rock. Arnold Layne, see Emily play The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. He wrote 8 of the 11 songs on that debut album, and every one of them sounded like the inside of a mind that worked in a way nobody else's did. David Gilmour said years later that Syd was simply the most original musician he'd ever encountered. By early 1968, they had stopped picking him up for gigs. The LSD had been there from the beginning. But somewhere in 1967, the drug crossed a line it couldn't come back from.
Hardly a sound till tomorrow.
Band members watched him change week by week, blank stares, not recognizing people he'd known for years, standing on stage with a detuned guitar, playing the same chord for 20 minutes straight. One week, he was fine, Richard Wright said. A week later, he was completely different. On January 26, 1968, while Roger Waters was driving the band to a show, someone asked whether they should pick Syd up, and someone else said, "Let's not bother," and they drove on. That was effectively the end. Pink Floyd went on to become one of the biggest bands in the history of recorded music.
In the sunshine town, feeling very cool. But the butchers in the
Wish You Were Here, Dark Side of the Moon, The Wall, all of it built on the foundation Syd laid, and in large part, all of it written about the grief of losing him. Shine on You, Crazy Diamond is a direct tribute to the man they left behind.
Put on a gown that touches the ground.
Syd spent the rest of his life in Cambridge, painting, gardening, refusing every interview. He died in 2006, quietly, at 60 years old. The band that became everything, the man who started it never got any of it, and the greatest album they ever wrote about him, they wrote while he was still alive. Number 7, Michael Hutchence. July 13th, 1991, Wembley Stadium, 74,000 people, in excess at the absolute peak. Michael Hutchence with his arms spread wide and his head thrown back, the most charismatic frontman of his generation, right at the center of it all. That's the image. Here's what came next, and what most people still don't fully know. 1 year later, Hutchence was lying unconscious on a street in Copenhagen. A taxi driver had shoved him and he fell backward, hitting the back of his head on concrete. He was taken to a hospital where doctors attributed his slurred speech and aggression to intoxication and sent him home. He spent a month in his girlfriend's apartment, vomiting, unable to get up before he finally agreed to a brain scan. The damage was permanent. His sense of smell, gone. His sense of taste, gone completely. He once told his sister that he couldn't smell his own newborn daughter, Tiger, when she was born. Not the newborn smell, nothing.
What you gonna do? We're gonna live a life.
And his personality changed in ways that those closest to him didn't have a framework to understand. In 1992, he became aggressive, unpredictable. At one point during a recording session, he threatened a bandmate with a knife. His brother Tim Ferriss said, "None of us felt like we really knew him anymore."
What you gonna do? We're gonna live a life.
Nobody understood why, because traumatic brain injuries and their effect on personality weren't understood in 1992 the way they are now. When neurologists were later shown the unedited coroner's report after Hutchence died in November 1997, they said the TBI was directly implicated. He wasn't the rock star who lost control. He was a man with an untreated brain injury who spent 5 years going to therapy that could never address the actual problem. The world saw a rock star in decline. What was actually happening was something much more specific and much more human and much more preventable.
'Cause I'm not sleeping.
Number 6, Brian Wilson. Pet Sounds, Good Vibrations, God Only Knows. If you've ever listened to any of those and felt something you couldn't quite put a name to, you felt what Brian Wilson made. In 1966, Brian Wilson created arguably the most musically sophisticated pop album ever recorded. While the Beatles were still learning studio technique, Wilson was writing orchestrations that changed how the entire industry thought about what a record could be. Pet Sounds is considered by many to be the most influential album in rock history. Brian Wilson made it from inside a breakdown. He had his first nervous breakdown in 1964 at 22 years old. Stopped touring, stayed home while the other Beach Boys went on the road. He was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, auditory hallucinations, depression, paranoia. He once described the voices as something he had to fight every few minutes all day long. Something derogatory whispered at him constantly, a fight he said never actually stopped. By the mid-1970s, he hadn't left his room in weeks. His weight reached 300 pounds. He'd been in a food and drug spiral that people around him genuinely feared would kill him. Then came Eugene Landy. His wife hired a psychotherapist who started as Brian's caregiver and ended as his controller. Landy isolated Wilson from his family and friends, moved into his house while Brian was sent to a rental, monitored every phone call, over-medicated him so heavily that observers described him as barely able to complete a sentence, changed his will to make himself the primary beneficiary, took co-writing credit on Brian's 1988 solo album, took executive producer credit. In 1986, Brian Wilson walked into a car dealership in Los Angeles and slipped a note to the saleswoman he would later marry. The note said, "Lonely, scared, frightened." That's not a superstar. That's a prisoner who had to communicate in secret because his handler was monitoring every call. Brian Wilson passed away on June 11, 2025. He was 82 years old. The man who wrote the soundtrack to An American Summer spent decades fighting for the right to simply exist on his own terms. Number 5 after the shift. Number 5, Freddie Mercury. There has never been a more complete live performer in rock history. I'll say it plainly. Watch the 1985 Live Aid footage. Freddie Mercury alone at the piano in front of 72,000 people with another 1.9 billion watching on television, doing exactly what he wanted to do, and the entire world in the palm of his hand. If you've ever seen it, you already know what I'm talking about, and if you haven't, stop what you're doing right now and find it. Everything you see in those performances, the control, the joy, the absolute ownership of every square foot of every stage, that was Freddie Mercury. Every bit of it was real. But by the late 1980s, every single one of those performances was also something else. Freddie Mercury was diagnosed with AIDS in 1987. He told almost nobody. He continued recording. He continued performing. He showed up at video shoots and stood in the light and delivered takes that still give people chills. The song The Show Must Go On, which Roger Taylor has said was written literally about Freddie's decision to keep performing despite knowing he was dying. Freddie reportedly recorded the lead vocal in a single take after drinking a large amount of vodka to get through it. The band knew, his closest friends knew, the medical team knew. The public didn't know until November 23rd, 1991. One day after he made the announcement, Freddie Mercury was dead. And here's the thing that gets me about this story. He made that choice deliberately to protect the music from being about his illness, to protect the concerts from becoming vigils. He kept it a performance right to the end because that was, for Freddie, the only way it could be done with dignity. The truth was always in the music. He just let the world think it was theater. Number 4, Chris Cornell.
15 days since
Chris Cornell was sober for 14 years before he died. 14 years? Let that land for a second. Soundgarden, Audio Slave, a solo career that included the Bond theme for Casino Royale. He had rebuilt everything twice. He went through rehab in 2002 and came out the other side. Said in a 2006 interview that without alcohol, everything looked better. Everything was more fun.
it's been 7 hours and
He was one of the greatest rock singers of his generation, and by every visible measure, he was okay. He performed at the Fox Theater in Detroit on May 17th, 2017. People who were at the show said something seemed off. He was moving differently, unsteady in a way that didn't read as tiredness, but it was Soundgarden. It was Chris Cornell. You rationalize what you see when you're watching someone you've loved for 20 years.
went to the doctor.
His bodyguard gave him 2 Ativan tablets after the show, his prescription, an anti-anxiety medication he'd been taking for about a year, called in remotely by a Beverly Hills doctor who had not physically examined him.
Since you
He called his wife Vicky about 45 minutes later. She said he sounded different, slurred. He told her he may have taken an extra Ativan or 2. She called security to check on him. When they got to the room, it was too late.
said, boy, you better try to have fun, no matter what.
Chris Cornell died on May 18th, 2017. His family later filed a lawsuit against the prescribing doctor who had been calling in those prescriptions to a recovering addict on the road, alone, without a single in-person examination.
What you do, but he's a fool, 'cause no.
That suit settled in 2021. He spent 14 years doing everything right. The system he trusted to help him stay that way failed him in the worst possible way. And the worst part, there were no warning signs the world could see. That's exactly how this title works. The success hid the truth completely.
I can eat my dinner in a fancy restaurant.
Number 3, Elvis Presley.
I'll say it clear. I stayed.
Here's what the mythology of Elvis Presley works very hard to skip over. The king died at 42 years old, in a bathroom, alone, at a weight the tabloids had been documenting for years and framing as a punchline.
I've loved.
And there was a physician, Dr. George Nicopolis, known to everyone around Elvis as Dr. Nick, who had written prescriptions for over 10,000 pills in the final 8 months of Elvis Presley's life. 10,000 pills, 8 months. The coroner's report listed 14 different drugs in his system. Now here's what makes this story belong on this list specifically. By the mid-1970s, Elvis Presley had become one of the most isolated human beings in American public life. He almost never left Graceland. His entire world was that property, that gate, those grounds.
My case, of which I'm certain.
The people around him, The Memphis Mafia were on his payroll. They had mortgages, they had families. Nobody told Elvis no, nobody could afford to. And the isolation wasn't a personality quirk. It was what happens when fame reaches a scale where there is no longer any separation between the person and the product.
Yes, I've had a few.
You stop being a man, you become a myth, and myths don't get to call their doctor and say, this isn't working, I need something different. People who were around Elvis in his final years said he knew what was happening to him, that he was aware of his own deterioration and couldn't locate the exit.
My share of losing, and now
His last concert was June 26, 1977, in Indianapolis. 6 weeks later, he was gone, the biggest star in American music history. The man who changed how the world heard sound died at 42, unreachable, alone, surrounded by people who loved him and could not find a way to save him.
you knew when I bit off.
Number 2, Kurt Cobain. There's something nobody talks about enough with Kurt Cobain. Not the fame, not the money, not the way to never mind changing the commercial landscape of rock overnight. We talk about all of that constantly. But Kurt Cobain was in physical pain for most of his adult life. A chronic, undiagnosed stomach condition that he couldn't explain and doctors couldn't pin down. He described it in interviews in a burning sensation that would put him on the floor. Something that made performing feel impossible, that made sleeping difficult, that he could not get relief from through conventional medicine. Some researchers later suggested undiagnosed scoliosis compressing spinal nerves. The medical community never arrived at a definitive answer during his lifetime. He started using heroin primarily to numb it, not as a cliche, again, not as a rock star rite of passage, as a person who had been in unexplained physical pain for years and finally found the one thing that gave him 4 hours of not feeling it. And layered on top of the physical pain was the fame he genuinely never wanted. He said in interviews he wanted to be like R.E.M., respected, artistically credible, not famous in the way that changes every room you walk into for the rest of your life. Nevermind sold 30 million copies. You cannot be R.E.M.'s her after 30 million copies of anything. He wrote in his journals about the exhaustion of performing being Kurt Cobain, about the impossibility of walking into any space anywhere in the world and not being the thing people needed him to be, about the feeling that the person he actually was had been replaced by a public character he'd never agreed to play. He died on April 5th, 1994, 27 years old. The note he left quoted Neil Young, "It's better to burn out than to fade away." But what gets missed is the context around that quote. He was rejecting the romanticism of it. He wasn't saying suffering is meaningful. He was saying, I am tired. The pain is real, both kinds. Number 1, Chester Bennington. Linkin Park sold 100 million records. 6 of their albums debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200. Only 9 other rock bands in history have matched that. Chester Bennington had 6 children. He was, by every visible measure, one of the most successful rock singers of his generation. And for 30 years, he had been carrying something most of the world never knew. When Chester was 7 years old, an older friend began sexually abusing him. It continued until he was 13. He didn't tell anyone for years. He was afraid no one would believe him, afraid they'd think he was making it up, afraid of what it would mean about him. He wrote in interviews that the abuse was what started the substance use, that the drugs were the only thing that made the memories quiet. That by age 11, he was already using alcohol, cocaine, and meth to make the noise stop. And here's what cuts the deepest about Chester Bennington. The songs were always the autobiography: Crawling, Breaking the Habit, Numb, In the End. Every single one of those songs, go back and listen to them again, knowing what you know now. He wasn't writing for a market. He was writing testimony. He was putting the truth in a container that millions of people could reach into and find their own version of it. And for 25 years, that's exactly what happened. Millions of people used Chester Bennington's pain to process their own. What the success hid was that the container was always him. The source never stopped hurting. His friend Chris Cornell died on May 18th, 2017. Chester sang at his funeral. He performed a rendition of Hallelujah, standing at the podium where he said goodbye to the person he called one of his closest friends. 2 months later, on July 20th, 2017, which was Chris Cornell's birthday, Chester Bennington was found dead at his home in Palos Verdes Estates, California. He was 41 years old, 6 kids, 100 million records, a voice that millions of people used to survive their own worst moments. And somewhere underneath all of it, a 7-year-old who never got the safety he deserved, who spent the rest of his life writing about it, who hoped the music was enough. It was enough for us. It just wasn't enough to save him.